On the back cover, Brian Mclaren says, okay, are you ready for this? Are you ready? It used to be that Christian institutions and systems of dogma sustained the spiritual life of Christians. Okay, systems of dogma, that's doctrine. But see, it's no longer that way. It just used to be that way. Increasingly, spirituality itself is what sustains everything else. By spirituality, he means contemplative prayer. Alan Jones is a pioneer in reimagining a Christian faith that emerges from authentic spirituality. His work stimulates and encourages me deeply. So the idea that all the world's religions and all of humanity can unite in this mystical silence stimulates and encourages him deeply. And by authentic spirituality, he means, meditation. Okay, this is Tony Jones. He wrote a book called Sacred Ways. And he says the basic method promoted in the cloud, that's the Cloud of Unknowing, which is a contemplative treatise, is to move beyond thinking. If you want God, you have to move beyond thinking. See, to us, praying is deeply thinking about God. It's when you really, really think about God. When you really throw all your heart and all your mind into your relationship with God. But with this, you have to move beyond thinking into a place of utter stillness with the Lord. The believer must first achieve a state of silence and contemplation, and then God works in the believer's heart. America's pastor, okay, in the Purpose-Driven Life, you can see the affiliation that Rick Warren has. He says the Bible tells us to pray all the time. One way is to use breath prayers throughout the day. You choose a brief sentence or a simple phrase that can be repeated to Jesus in one breath. Pray it as often as possible. Well, how often is that? You could do it literally hundreds of times a day. Say the same thing over and over again. And he uses an example of Brother Lawrence as someone who practiced the presence of God, i.e. using breath prayers. Well, Brother Lawrence was a monk of he was a Carmelite monk in the 1600s in Paris. And he was of the same lineage as St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross. He was separated by about 100 years or so. And this is from a man who knew him. This guy was a Catholic official in Paris. He knew Brother Lawrence. He said, it is said of Brother Lawrence that when something had taken his mind away from love's presence, he would receive a reminder from God that so moved his soul, he cried out singing and dancing violently like a madman. You will note that the reminders came from God and were not his own doing. In other words, he was saying whenever Brother Lawrence stopped thinking about God, God would kind of jerk him back and make him sing and dance violently like a madman. Well, is that really the presence of God? Now, David danced. There's nothing wrong with dancing and singing if you're happy, right? Some Christians may think that's not good. But I think, if you're happy and joyful, you can do a little dance and, kind of sing, that's okay. But it said he did it violently like a madman. Well, I don't think the key word there is violently. Well, I don't think God would make you act violently, would he? If you're acting violently, then something is wrong, right? I don't think that Brother Lawrence had the presence of God if he would sing and dance violently like a madman. Brother Lawrence did not get the actual presence of God. He got the presence of a familiar spirit. Hey, this is Gary Thomas. How many of you go to Christian bookstores quite often? Okay, how many of you have seen the books like Sacred Parenting and Sacred Marriage and books like that? Well, anyhow, that's Gary Thomas. He wrote a book called Sacred Pathways. And in it, he talks about centering prayer. He says, in general, however, and this is what the emerging church is using as a way to get in touch with God. He says, in general, however, centering prayer works like this, and contemplative prayer and centering prayer are the same thing. Choose a word, Jesus or Father, for example, as a focus for contemplative prayer. Repeat the word silently in your mind for a set amount of time, say 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Until your heart seems to be repeating the word by itself, just as naturally and voluntarily as breathing. Well, 20 minutes, can you imagine saying Father? Father, 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 Father. I mean, I just said it for 5 seconds? Can you imagine saying that for 20 minutes? See, if you did that and you focused on it, you would go into altered states of consciousness. Gary Thomas got this from Basil Pennington, who talks about that the wisdom of these should be captured for Christ. Because in that book, he mentions Basil Pennington quite a number of times, 5 on one page in Sacred Pathways. So there is a connection there. But Rick Warren says, Gary has spoken at Saddleback, and I think highly of his work. He tells them, readers, how they can make the most of their spiritual journeys. He places an emphasis on practical spiritual exercises. And I believe this is why Rick Warren wrote the foreword to the Emerging Church and has a favorable view of much of the Emerging Church, because it's mystical. There was a guy named Karl Rahner who was one of the people that was behind the Vatican II thing there in the 1960s, and he wrote that the Christian of the future will be a mystic, or he or she will be nothing at all. Karl Rahner. He was, like I said, he was considered the brains behind Vatican II, and that appears to be happening. That what we're seeing here, the Emerging Church, and Rick Warren's view of spirituality, that the Christian of the future will be a mystic, and we're in the process of transitioning to that right now. Contemplative prayer is an esoteric tradition. Like I said earlier, that this is not something you find in the Bible. It was something that was only found in like convents and monasteries, and was only brought out of the convents and monasteries by Thomas Merton. He was the one responsible. Okay, true prayer is a personal relationship with God. Amen? Amen. It's a personal relationship with God based on being in your 5 senses. Praying in your 5 senses. Christianity was not designed as a mystical religion. It was designed for everyone. It was designed for the common folk. This idea of only the super spiritual, can reach God through contemplative prayer is not a biblical concept. The Apostle Paul said, this is an important one, folks. This is very important. The Apostle Paul said, "For I have not shunned to declare unto you the whole counsel of God." In other words, whatever God wanted us to know, he gave us in the Bible, the whole counsel of God. And there's nothing in Paul's epistles about contemplative prayer. There's nothing in Paul's epistles about repeating a sacred word over and over again for 20 minutes, right? Absolutely nothing. I mean zero, zilch, nada. Okay? And Jesus himself said in Matthew 6:7, "And when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think they will be heard for their many words." Okay, now here's the part that many of you probably resonate with. Now the Spirit expressly says that in the latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons. Now I believe that all these people that are getting in touch with what they believe to be God are actually getting in touch with deceiving spirits. And the word in the King James is seducing spirits, which has an even more sinister connotation. Because, if you're seduced, it means you're getting an imposter. Somebody who seduces people does so by presenting themselves as something they're not. And doctrines of demons. I believe that God being the rust on the fence is a doctrine of demons. Amen? Yeah, I believe that if we all knew who we really were, we'd fall down and worship each other as a doctrine of demons.
We are saved by the blood on the cross. We are saved by the life that was lost. By the life that was lost, by the life regained. He was laid in the grave, but he never